No doubt you're here today, you're probably thinking about fractional, how it might benefit your business, and we'll shortly be talking about how you can use it to leverage, or how these businesses used it to leverage their growth bottlenecks. But I want you to think about what problem you've got that you could actually use fractional for, and what's kind of holding you back, what kind of challenges and what do you need to kind of resolve in your own mind to get you across the line and make that decision around fractional. So the first question really, and it's open up to all the panellists here, and probably maybe we'll start with Sandra, around your kind of experience and understanding of fractional when you started your journey and you started using them, and also kind of the benefits and your rationale as a growing organisation.
Well, my journey began in 2010, and as a primary caregiver and business builder, it took, I did the bootstrap kind of take it slow, build as I can fit in my life. So the software that we built grew to, we work with 400 schools now around New Zealand. But it was really in the last kind of 12 to 18 months that I looked at that and thought, well, actually now is the time to really get some growth going, in a more traditional, not so bootstrapped way. We want to cap raise, we want to get into high schools, and the way to do that I knew was I needed some knowledge, I needed some tools, some kind of ways of making that happen. So I found using a fractional exec was fabulous because it meant that while I had not personally been able to go and work in all these different businesses and learn and keep up to date with the latest practices, someone else could. So our fractional exec came into the business, brought with her all sorts of tools and processes and methodologies and knowledge from different SaaS companies, and really made a huge difference to the practice that we have within our company. And that's got us to the point now where we can really grow.
We're a small company. We've only got a few people, the co-founders in it. And, we're engineers by trade, and we're just trying to learn everything else. But it wasn't until a few months ago that we sort of realized we need to get some help. We want to move faster than having to learn everything by ourselves. And that's where we learnt about the fractional community and thought, this is a good thing that we can give a go to kind of fill in some of the blanks that we had, around, building customer journeys and customer success and those sorts of things. So, yeah, bringing on fractional sort of was really great because they could just come in, hit the ground running. And, for me, really, what the way that I learn is sort of through imitation and seeing, how things are done rather than sort of being told how to do them. That doesn't really work so well. So, the fractional sort of method has worked really well for us so far, and we've just brought on a second one as well.
So I took over as CEO at Listing Logic in 2021, took over from the founder and got the remit to scale the business in New Zealand and Australia, wanted to grow it considerably over the next few years. But it was a founder-led company with basically no structure. We had limited runway and needed to be able to put in the skills and abilities to take it forward. I did have a virtual, as it was called in that day, CFO, one person on board, but needed the marketing skills to take us from marketing 101 right into where we needed to be on a global basis. No sales material at all, no understanding of the customer base and how we could break that down. So had to bring all those skills in place and just didn't have the cash to be able to bring in high enough level skills. I would have had to go and get a whole lot of juniors that had no experience at all. So that's why we went down the virtual route and had a full C-suite of virtuals effectively that would work with me 1 to 2 days a week.
I mean, VWork was I guess in a scale-up phase, or it was in the scale-up phase. So the product has been built. We've got customers, a couple of hundred customers in 10 countries. So we weren't a software startup in that case, but we were again, as Christoph said, we're a group of engineers, so the sales and marketing disciplines, I think, were where we were struggling, and that's where we saw we could drive growth. But I've had experience in the past where you sort of get into this cost outcomes trap. You go out and hire, it's very attractive to go out and hire someone who has sort of come from corporate, maybe they've been in a CMO role or head of sales. They come in, but they just don't have enough levers to pull to kind of justify the cost. And it's not a fault of theirs, and it's not a fault of the company. It's just there's this scale mismatch. Someone who's say been working for Spark in marketing doesn't have minions to do the other heavy lifting for them. And excuse me, and I've seen that where you bring those sorts of people in, and then they get very disillusioned, and you kind of get this this parting of ways. And I think going down the CMO the fractional route brought us in both CMO and head of sales who they want to work with your scale of business, so they're not surprised at the resource gaps you have in the business, but they bring in this experience that's very relevant to the business that you need. So you kind of get the best of both worlds. You get that experience, but you get someone who's used to working with your scale of business, and whether it is a small startup or whether it's a bigger corporate, and I think there is room in corporates as well, that they come in with that expectation. So you don't have this huge cost and then someone who's kind of disillusioned because they don't have all the sort of support mechanisms that they're used to having. And I think it's a great way for finding someone who's sort of right scale for your business.
And that's a really interesting kind of insight. And just kind of building on that, what were your kind of challenges that you overcame? And what kind of best practices could you share with the group?
Yeah, so we actually started off. We recognised there was two areas: sales, in terms of sales management, pure sales, and in marketing, particularly in much more sort of the digital space in marketing. We started off with trying to use a virtual head of sales, and I think there's some good opportunities for virtual, but I've found that they've tended to it's worked best when they're operational. If you're trying to affect some sort of culture change, which we were trying to do, as I said, there was no sales and marketing DNA in VWork. Bringing in someone who's a virtual sales leader, it was too transactional, but bringing someone in who was a fractional head of sales and a fractional head of marketing, because they were actually in the business, they were much more engaged. The fact that they were actually present rather than in the US, it had a much more cultural impact, I think, and that's helped us sort of really drive that change. And because they're engaging much more directly with the people who are kind of on actually doing at the coalface, so to speak, in sales and in marketing. And I think that's been quite a learning for me, rather than I think they've got to be in the business. I think the other thing is that you've still got to manage them as you would sort of any employee. So these people are coming in with the best of intentions, of course, but how your business operates and what your brand is can be quite different to the last company that they engaged with. And I think you have to be quite strong in saying, this is the way we do it, and we do it this way for a certain reason. Now, they might challenge you, and I'm happy to be challenged, and sometimes they're right. But I think, you can't just sort of say, well, I brought you in, you're the expert, and sort of have at it. You've still got to make sure you maintain the brand and the culture of your business, and they have to work with that, but you just have to be clear around it. And I've never had any issues with it, but I think those people being in your business is really the real benefit you get of a fractional versus sort of a purely virtual.
That's great. Cheers. Thanks for that, Roy. Wanda Sanj, you had a kind of a perspective around kind of that change process and making that kind of work in your instance.
Yeah, so well, one thing I'd say with bringing a fractional in is it's not an ego boost for the CEO, who needs to be open to learning. And I learned a lot, and I loved it. But I was very much engaged with that journey, and I think probably something to be aware of is just it is change, and it's change management that is required for the rest of your team. And so that's probably one thing I would note, is that if you're going to do it, totally be open to the learning and take on as much as you can, but remember that it's change, and not everyone in the company is going to be as happy with that change as you are. So it is a process of change management if you're doing what I did and going, all right, let's go. Let's bring in a whole lot of new stuff. And yeah, I loved it. Some others not so much, but
Okay.
yeah.
When you were kind of mentioning that, there are a few heads nodding on the panel, and I was noticing a few heads nodding around the room too. So,
Yeah.
I mean, Christoph, what's your kind of experience in kind of selecting fractional execs?
Yeah, I think, backing off what Sandra said there a little bit, is that, when you're sort of trying to identify who to bring on like that, you, as a CEO, you're sort of expected to be able to do so much, and if you can't, you've got to do it anyway. But it's also, sort of having the humility to understand the bits that you don't know necessarily that well, because we can't be all masters of everything, and then trying to fill that gap. And that's where, I was looking for Fractional to help me out there and sort of upskill me, as well as like put in better processes and so on in the business.
Awesome. That sounds great. And Chris, what should kind of CEOs be considering? What kind of factors should they be considering when they selecting?
I think there's been a lot of really good points made, but that cultural fit is really important. They are joining your team, and so you want them to bring that skill base in. I think the ability to also grow. I used a CMO came in, as I said, started with sort of basics 101. We ended up getting to a point where we could employ a head of marketing who helped us implement HubSpot, and they were full-time in our team. But the virtual or fractional, as it had then become called, CMO, stayed around and mentored my new head of marketing. So you get this sort of transition from starting the basics, helping you recruit, and then mentoring the new person as they hand over, so that there's a seamlessness. I think the other thing was the willingness to share with the younger members of my team a lot of learning. So especially, say, in the sales area, where they came in and they could just be sponges to the skill sets that the fractional person brought in. But yeah, that resistance, that cultural resistance, I had one person in particular who he'd been around for a long time in the team and just resisted the new ideas that were coming. So my role as a CEO was to try and smooth between the young people that were sponges and this guy that had, just made things a little bit more difficult for both myself and for the fractional.
That's great. So questions for you around your full kind of, having a full fractional kind of C-suite. How did kind of the collaboration work and the kind of overlap work? How did you kind of manage that process?
We had a SLT meeting once a week that the whole fractional team would be at. So that was sort of 1 hour when everybody was in the office, and hear the sales, product manager, everybody would hear what was going on. And then my role was to sit there and actually coordinate across everybody else. So, you can imagine between sales and marketing, those two people had a lot of interface between each other. Between product and tech development, there was a lot of stuff happening between there. Finance was obviously out doing financy type things. My role was to sit across the whole lot and bring the strategy and culture elements to bear.
Another question here, and I open this up to anybody in the panel really, is how have you established accountability to kind of hold fractionals to account? So you can select the microphone.
My fractional exec came in and actually did that. She came in and she's like, okay, what is it you want to achieve? I think, these are the things, therefore, that we should be doing. We got the Trello board set up, and you could just see her dragging stuff over and getting stuff done, and it was awesome. That was part of my learning.
Yeah.
Mm. And actually, I'd point out that that's what is so amazing about a fractional exec compared to just someone who is providing advice. Like, you're not just given a list of things that you need to go and do. you're actually, someone is giving you the list and doing them themselves, and then you're learning with that at the same time. It's a very different experience, and I found it so much more useful.
So here's the top question at the moment, which I have been avoiding, but I will ask it anyway. I'm going to add an extra thing to it. So how? I haven't been avoiding it because it's a bad question at all. It's a good question, and I think you know, you can learn a lot from your mistakes. So how have you as business leaders? Well, what bad experiences have you had, and kind of what went wrong? But I also want you to share with us a good experience and how that kind of went right. So I want you to hear a bad experience, what went wrong, and a kind of a good experience as well. And maybe we'll kind of take one from each of the panelists.
I'll start. So, I mean, I guess I wouldn't say it was a bad experience, but it was more, I think, probably a lost opportunity. I said we started off with a virtual head of sales, and I have to say, you know, personally, I think he's great experience, but that distance and it was very transactional in an area that, you know, in hindsight, we sort of really needed to affect a cultural change. And I've used virtual, you know, whether you call them consultants or whatever, in a number of areas, and where they've come in and they've got some particular expertise, and they do a task and then they're kind of out. It's worked incredibly well. You know, I've brought in PhDs and professors and things to do certain bits of tech, which I would never have been able to do either in New Zealand, if those people were available, and that's worked well. But again, it's very transactional. And when we moved to a fractional head of sales, I think the difference was we suddenly got someone who was, you know, as we said, sort of actually embedded in the business, turning up, building personal relationships with the sales team and the wider organisation. And I think the benefit of that has been much more than, you know, the kind of a multiple of just the time, because you as Sandra alluded to, you've got people who they're not sort of protective of their job. You know, if I train my sales guy really well, he'll replace me. They're not worried about that. That ego bit doesn't come in. And the other thing is you suddenly get these people who, you know, there's a whole raft of experience they've got. So whether you might be talking about your CMO about how to deal with some finance thing, because they've been in all these businesses, and I think it's really, I think for me, the bad experience was making the wrong pick. You know, I did virtual when I really needed a kind of a relationship thing, and I think you could probably do it the other way around. You know, perhaps bringing someone fractional who's on your CTO's ear all the time when you just need some sort of engineering thing to happen may not be the best outcome as well. So
Great, cheers.
With our company, when we originally founded it, after the first year or two, we had a founder that was really not working out, and was probably just not cut out for the sort of thing that we needed them to do. And it resulted in us eventually having to fire the person for misconduct, which sort of made us a little gun shy with regards to hiring again and all that kind of stuff. But we thought we'd give the fractional thing a go with apprehension at first, but then when we saw that the person could come in, actually hit the ground running and be productive from day one, it just changed our minds straight away on that. So it's really good.
So it sounds like no specific bad experiences.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's really bad. I mean, I think all of the fractional folks will come in with a desire to do something well. I mean, that's why they're in that space. Mine was in the sales area, where had somebody come in and kind of really didn't like when I pushed back on a proposal that had been put to the business, especially around HubSpot. And I kind of really wanted to know what the cost was going to be, because I didn't believe that it was going to be free. And so there was pushback, and then suddenly I got the note that said I actually had other things I needed to be doing and wouldn't be coming back again. And so I was kind of left a little bit high and dry. The nice thing was part of a consortium, so they were able to help and backfill quite nicely. So that sort of the fractionals are out on their absolute own. I think they're kind of by themselves, and there's a lack of community. But there's more and more that are groups, and this is a good example of that, where actually there's ways of making sure you've got that backstop. Some of the really good experiences are things like a CFO that was able to introduce me to ways of getting about $250,000 out of the tax department. Kind of helpful when you find that you can access some of those tax losses. So, just those experiences that they've had that a mid-tier wouldn't be able to bring into the business.
So the next top question one really, I think we've probably already answered. So the question is, does fractional leadership work best for startups and early stage companies? And we've got a few kind of people who have currently got startups or had startups and grown them. Fractional, it sounds like fractionals worked for you all.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm not sure there's a right stage. Probably I would put it on a scale up phase where you're really needing to manage your runway and have the skill set that can help you take yourself into that next level. Startup, maybe you don't have quite the cash and the founder really needs to do some hard work first.
Round of applause for everybody.